Alright everybody, it's your pal Revolver84 here, and today I'm going to introduce to you the first episode of a new series I'm making called ESO for Beginners. The idea being that it'll be a few episodes of very quick, very punchy, few minute long videos on very basic Eldr Scrolls Online stuff designed specifically for new starters coming to the game. We've got a few things lined up over the next couple of episodes, things like rotation, horse, your essential skill lines and passives that you'll be good to use, abbreviations that new starters might not be familiar with. But today what I want to do is talk about classes. So there are 3 classes in the Eldr Scrolls Online, and they are usually just 3 classes for most MMOs. They are traditionally healer, tank and DPS. The reason being that there's 3 is that they all have different roles within the game, and they have different responsibilities to take at different times, whether you're in PvE, PvP, trials, public dungeons, that sort of thing. You have different actions at different times, and your gaming experience will alter depending on what class you are. So without further ado, let's jump in. So you can find a quick review of what your classes would be by going to your activity finder, and then up here it explains the different roles, the different classes that you can choose from. So I'll just go through them from left to right. So the left one is a tank. Absorbs damage from enemies and prevents allies from being attacked. So basically what a tank does is he basically goes up to the biggest, meanest, toughest thing in the room and taunts it. And what I mean by taunts it, I mean he gets the most aggressive, most hard-hitting enemy's attention focused purely on him. The reason being is that if all the attention from the biggest, strongest enemy is hitting the tank, it's not hitting the other players. Now what does that mean in reality? It means that your build will be designed not so much for healing, not so much for causing damage. Your build will be designed to take damage, so there'll be a lot of focus on your armor, there'll be a lot of focus on your health and your health recovery. One of the disadvantages of being a tank is that it doesn't have a lot of DPS, which means progression through the game, especially in the early stages, levels 1 to 50, can be quite slow and can feel quite grindy at times, because whereas in other roles you can go through enemies like a knife through butter, it tends to be a little bit more of a challenge and a little bit more of a hack and slash to get yourself through. A couple of tips: you could become a tank post level 50 when you hit CP, or you could have your tank built in a way whereby you have 2 sort of setups, or possibly even more. You could have a tank designed for PvE progression, which has a bit more crit, has a bit more spell and weapon penetration and weapon damage, and then you could tool it out differently when you're going into VMA or other areas like trials and such like, or pledges and such like. Another advantage of a tank is there isn't a very big population of tanks, which generally means that when you join a queue for a dungeon, you tend to get picked quite quickly. I know it's not the case in this particular example here. It says average dungeon queuing time is just under 1 hour. That's unusual. Normally it's relatively fast. The next role I'd like to talk about is your healer. So it says heals and protects allies, keeping them alive throughout the battle. And a healer basically is that. So a healer is not designed to sustain any damage, and a healer is not even really designed to pass out any damage. A healer is designed to keep everyone alive on the team. Now that is obviously critical in things such as dungeons and trials. Your healer is basically your Johnny on the spot, keeping everyone else alive. There's a lot of focus on the healer to make sure that the tank was able to keep the attention of the main bosses in the particular areas as well, while keeping their eye on the ball with the other guys in the group, making sure that they're not taking so much damage that they're gonna die. But in addition to that, there's more to it than just healing. So also there's other buffs as well. So your healer hasn't got to just be healing your health. Your healer has a responsibility to try and max out the other guy's stamina and the other guy's magicka, and there's various different types of abilities that the healer can choose to do that. Now, what's the advantages of being a healer? Well, there's a big one there, and you can see it in front of us. Average dungeon queuing times under a minute. everyone is your friend if you're a healer, because there's so few of yous. And because there's so few of yous, it means that your queuing time to get into dungeons is really small. It means that when you find a good healer, you tend to become best friends with them, because there's good healers and bad healers, and the fact that there's only a few healers to begin with is a bit annoying. But if you're a good healer, everyone wants to be your friend. Disadvantages: well, again, you're not designed to take damage, so you can't take a lot of damage. You're not designed to stand toe to toe with anyone, generally speaking. Healers are predominantly magicka based builds, and they tend to wear very light armour, and they don't tend to do a lot of damage. And similar to tanks, in the sense that because they don't do a lot of damage, PvE progression and level 1 to 50 progression can feel quite slow. That's not to say you don't do damage with your restoration stuff and such like, you do, but your main focus and your main purpose in life is to heal other players, so you're very much a group player. The final role is DPS, or in ESO's case, damage. DPS stands for damage per second. It basically means focusing on dealing damage against enemies that pose a threat. In other words, your build is basically designed to cause as much damage as physically possible in such a short period of time. So your damage per second. So if your damage per second is high, i.e. you're doing a lot of damage per second, it means that you are tearing through the health of your enemies. Some advantages of that: it means that progression through the game, especially early doors, levels 1 to 50, is relatively fast, especially near the end when you've got all your abilities unlocked. It provides a lot of flexibility. DPSs can easily move from PvE, PvP, dungeons, group dungeons, pledges, trials. They can move between all those different activities relatively quickly without having to play too much with their builds. They can carry most abilities across all them different fields. They can use most of their armor across all them different fields and don't have to play a lot around. It very much isn't a technical build and doesn't require a lot of attention. Basically all you're looking at is how much weapon damage you can cause, or spell damage, and how much your critical percentage is. Other advantages of the DPS is that the armor you tend to find that drops in the world is mostly medium, and also as well the enchantments and abilities for medium armor seem to be very generously laid towards DPSs as well. The reason for that is because everyone in the grandmother is a DPS on ESO. Everyone. It's really awkward. Because obviously it gets you through most things really easy, and you know you can skip between areas of the game relatively fast, and it's a level it's a role that everyone's comfortable with. You tend to find the vast majority of the ESO population is DPS. Your traditional dungeon group should consist of 1 tank, 1 healer and 2 DPS. That way everyone's got a role to do and there's 2 DPS causing damage. Because the population's so big, it's not unusual to find yourself in there with 3 DPS guys and maybe 1 tank or 1 healer. Just because the activity finder can't pair you up with anyone else other than DPSs. Disadvantage of that, and a big disadvantage of that, is generally speaking, because there's so many DPSs, you do find yourself more often than not in unbalanced groups, like I said, where you haven't got a healer or where you haven't got a tank. Or alternatively, you could end up finding yourself waiting for absolutely ages in a queue to join a group because there's just so many damage out there. So that's your review of the three types of roles you can choose from within ESO. They aren't new things to MMOs. They are very much not rocket science. Pretty much most MMOs have that class breakdown. They all play different ways and they all require different playstyles, skill sets, passives and abilities to be unlocked to perform them properly. They are variously dependent on attributes. So for example, tank is very much health sort of based, healer is very much sort of magicka sort of based, DPS can be stam or magicka, but purely for a damage affecting sort of abilities. so they are nothing new, and you'll tend to find that if you're a regular MMO player, those groups are the standard groups across most MMO games. The reason that I've wanted to do this as my first video in ESO for beginners is because consoles have recently joined the MMO world, and there's a lot of players on console who have absolutely no concept of this trinity. And if you're going to join ESO and become a player, one of the first decisions you need to make consciously is what role you want to build your character towards and what role you want to fit in. That's not to say you can't fix it later on with attribute movements and CP changes, but it just makes life very easy if very early doors you decide to yourself, I am going to be this character, I'm going to use these weapons, and I'm going to focus on this armor, and that's going to be my build. So that's it for today. Thanks very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I say, I wanted to keep it very short and punchy. No real graphics, no real special effects or anything, just down to the bare bones of what's required for ESO. Like I say, keep yourselves peeled on this channel, because there'll be future ESO beginner videos coming very soon. All the best. Ta-da.